Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday, and welcome to the Restoring Our Roots podcast, the voice of the Decriminalize Nature movement. This podcast is a gathering space where we explore the wisdom of entheogenic plants and fungi, the beauty of natural healing, and the importance of reconnecting with the sacred earth. Twice a month, we'll hear from visionaries, healers, and advocates who are working with entheogenic plants and fungi, exploring realms of consciousness, and returning us to a balanced relationship with nature. My name is Larry Norris. I'm the co-founder of Decriminalize Nature and the national organizing director. I've had the privilege of being able to talk to people all over the U.S. and worldwide, actually, but focused a lot on the nation right now and passing now 30 cities across the U.S. that have effectively decriminalized psychedelic plants and mushrooms, or entheogens as we call them, such as mushrooms with cacti, or excuse me, mushrooms with psilocybin and psilocin, cacti with mescaline, plant combinations similar to ayahuasca that have DMT, and plants with ibogaine in there. So if anyone out there doesn't have policy shifted in your area, please give us a call or reach out to us at info@decriminalizenature.org, and we'd be happy to help you out. And we support teams all over the U.S., and there might be even a team in your local area there. So reach out and find out more. Also, really happy to have Rachel on board with us today. As always, Rachel, thank you for all the work you're doing on the backside, all the production, and putting these podcasts up in the future. We're going live right now on YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble, but in about a week or two, we'll be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and some other podcast platforms as well. So, Rachel, thank you for doing all that work back there and for inspiring this wonderful conversation to continue happening in our podcast for the season 3, I think we're on. Also, I'd like to say if you want to continue watching these shows and keeping these seasons going, please give us a donation. Check the donation box down at the bottom of the caption there and help Decriminalize Nature as a movement grow, and also the podcast as well. So thank you for all your support on this. For any of the live listeners out there, keep in mind that Rachel will be gathering any questions or comments you have in the comments section. So go ahead and put your comments in the box there. In the last 10 minutes, we'll go ahead and ask any questions to Howie that come up or have any comments that you have. So don't be shy. Go ahead and add some stuff in there. We'd love to have the conversations at the end. Really excited to have our guest today. Our guest today is Howard Whitehouse. I've known Howie for a really long time. I think it was 2011, 2008, 9, maybe sometime around 2009 at least. I think that we met up at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Howie's always had really incredible conversations around psychedelic integration and consciousness transformation and the vessel which all those come together. Howie's had a very nuanced and long history as well with the psychedelic culture here in the Bay Area and beyond. Originally even from Chicago, so I'm guessing in some time there as well. How he's an artist. He has some incredible art pieces. I just saw a show that he did up on Solstice, I believe at the Live Worms Gallery in San Francisco. Some really incredible art there, looking in some 3D perspectives as well. So you have this sort of textured art that kind of comes out of the wall, which I really find fascinating. And I've always really enjoyed our conversations in the past. We've had Howie actually has been a board member of entheogenic research, integration, and education in the past as well. And he's doing some incredible work right now with his big venue in San Francisco, which had a really incredible punk show I'm just hearing last night as well. So I'm really great to have you on the show. I really enjoyed our conversations, and I look forward to having some more great conversations with you. How are you doing today, Howie?
Doing pretty good. We had a show last night, so I just had to get up and get into different gear here for doing the talk today.
Yeah,
But
what was that? Just a little. What was the show about? Just
well, it's the old Mabui Gardens, which was one of the famous places on the West Coast here, along with Madame Wong's down in Los Angeles. We got the place. I became friends with the woman that owned the place, and she lost her partner and needed to find another partner to help her with the venue. So I was helping her, and we found someone. And then she passed, unfortunately, very early. She was dealing with some cancer. But the two of the people that I introduced them to each other, they were working together, and Tom, the fellow that was helping her, took on the place and bought it, and he kept it going. So we're starting to book shows, all kinds of punk shows there. We're going to have international music. So it's a big place. It's a 400 seat place upstairs, 200 people downstairs. So it's a big elaborate business. So I'm learning about it and just hooking the new owner up with the people that I know in the Bay Area here that it's into music and the arts.
and it
So
has a long history of being kind of a place for activism and advocacy and punk scene and all that.
it was a punk scene primary place in San Francisco in the 70s and 80s. And it was a place where where a lot of the bands wanted to play, and it was kind of an underground place that became well known. Yeah, and so it's got a history. So we're getting a lot of the older folks now that used to play there. that still have their bands somewhat together. They want to come out. Jello Biafra came out from the Dead Kennedys last night and kind of blessed the place. And it was a very, very interesting night. And all the folks that were producing music back then are getting interested in it because it's kind of like reconnecting us with our roots, talking about a reconnection with indigenous roots in the city here. And it was when the activism was happening in the 60s. So, looking out into the culture, we're at a place now we might need to reconnect in order to move forward again. So it's a timely event that kind of goes along with the expanded states of consciousness to have the music kind of the visceral, instinctual kind of thing brought back in.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, it sounds like quite a project. I look forward to checking it out in the near future. But yeah, so we have you here. We're going to be talking about plants and mushrooms today, and consciousness, and altered states of consciousness, and transformation, and phenomenology, and all that good stuff. But tell us before we start into all that, a little bit of a background. Tell us a little bit about your bio, how you got here today, in terms of your research and your interests in this area.
Yeah, well, it was a long trip. It's from integral studies, working with you and the student group, and then working with the San Francisco Psychedelic Society. I got together with two ladies, Sonia and Damla, and we started doing integration circles for about 7 years, and then COVID hit. We went on Zoom and continued it for all 2 years, 2.5 years, and then we started to do some looking around to get it live again, and I found a place here in North Beach to do it. So about 9 years. We're the first ones, I think, to do the integration circles in the Bay Area here, and it was coming from a place where people were having experiences usually prior to coming to an integration group, and they were going, "How do we integrate this experience?" And it was always people were always kind of grabbing on, trying to figure like what do I do with this? It was a new perspective that was given to them. So we started to realize that the question shifted more from integration out the backside of the experience to, well, how did people prepare in the past for these experiences? And I realized that there were some models, particularly from the Licinian Mystery School, where they would prepare for 6 months. So I started getting interested not only in the integration side, but in the preparation side. And then I started asking the question, well, what is getting initiated by these medicines? It was so that became um, kind of like a research project for me because it was this self archetype, or the what Jung called the master archetype of the self, was actually getting activated. And Groff used to say it's amplification, that the psychedelics do, but they also, prior to amplifying something, they activate something that's latent. And then I started looking at developmental psych, and I started looking at cognitive science, and I realized that there is this built-in instinctive kind of predilection we have that we're born with. It's in our genes, in a collective sense. It exists. It's a latent developmental pattern that, if nurtured properly, will evolve. And then the question came up, noticing that there's no shared cross-cultural rite of passage available for Western society. We really didn't have a model to use. So most of us were coming to the medicine and coming out of experience with the medicine in a somewhat kind of an arrested state of ego development. And the symptoms of that were either narcissism, like an amplification side on one side, or on the other side, kind of a lack of boundaries and a lack of self identity, and kind of a lack of clarity about ego. And what ended up happening was the medicine, what it does, it activates and hits that ego. So if someone would come to the medicine without a sense of who they are, and what that ego would look like in an initiated state, as it was done, for thousands of years, there were rites of passage available to people when they hit between adolescence, and they were ending the adolescent period, moving into adulthood. There was a community there to support them to make the transition into adulthood. So they had a place in the society, They had guides available to them, and they had a coherent, shared, let's say, ritual sacred rite of passage available to bring them into this adult attitude from the adolescent. So with that missing, I call it an arrested state of development. And in a way, we were coming to the medicine looking for that structure, and the structure would get activated by the medicine. So we had a lot of new problems because all of a sudden now you have collective information coming in from the history of the collective unconscious. You have personal information coming in from the personal unconscious, and the ego is being dissolved, so it's not available to receive the information. So there's a lot of chaos that was going on without knowing what the process was. I started getting into this guy John Vervaeke, who was a cognitive scientist, and he was talking about the Neoplatonic thing, where knowledge was really a path, and it's in yoga too, the jnana knowledge path, of how knowledge and wisdom is a path to awakening. And I thought, well, it would be good to bring some knowledge back, because with the ego being dissolved with the medicine, a lot of people thought the idea was to get the ego out of the way and not to bring it back, even just to kind of like it was an obstacle somewhat. So I wanted to kind of question that and look at how do you use the medicine to make the ego healthy, so that it's kind of like a pre-initiated ego to a post-initiated ego. And I thought, looking at the developmental psych, that there are models from Washburn, from Jung, from Eric Nyman, where the ego develops and needs to be supported in the initiation process. So I started trying to do a model of what postmodern, cross-cultural uh, community would look like. What would it look like to have a model to use for initiation that would be good enough to just structure out what happens in the process? So this is the work that I've been doing now for about 5-6 years. I just received some postdoc support to work on this, and I'm going to put forth a little workbook that people could look at and use, and have it be like an open model, so that they could grow from participation with the community to kind of see if we could develop something. So I'm working on that, and I'd be happy to share some of it with you, in this time we have here.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I mean, before we jump into that, because that's an amazing conversation to have. Let's rewind back a little bit, because you kind of have, when you think about sort of CIS, or you think about some of the psychedelic era, and like the earlier times before the current model, you were kind of right in it with about a lot of people, kind of engaging with the CIS stuff, but also with a lot of underground work and that type of thing. What was that like? What was the energy like at that time? Well, you had to do this kind of in a quiet way, but you were also dealing with, big experiences and people that were really taking big transformations and things like that. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that time frame.
Yeah, well, when I came in to do my doctorate work, I went up to my roommate Roger, and I said, I can't just do this theory stuff alone anymore, because I had just done a master's degree, and I wanted to have an experiential part to it. And he says, well, I'll introduce you to someone. He'll give you an experience. And he took me to meet a curandero that was working with some of the students at the school, and ended up I ended up working with him for about 10 years. I experienced a couple of the sessions he had, and they were amazed qualitatively, let's just say, different than any kind of psychological theory or model for therapy. We would work in groups, and there was an experience of really connecting with people at a deep level in the collective space. And it was I had a few experiences working with this curandero, that I saw that we could actually have like a group dreaming, a group experience together in an expanded state of consciousness. So it all of a sudden opened up this door that I had no idea, of what this was about. It was kind of like what they used to talk about with the Aborigine dream time. You can go into a space and have a collective experience. So that really, really opened up things. And it was interesting because when you're in the group, what we would do is we would do overnight journeys. And then in the morning, we would integrate and talk, sometimes 4 or 5 hours, and everybody would have a chance to share what their experience was. And there were a lot of times where people would share what the experience was in the medicine and validate it when we would talk at the integration in the morning. And it was an amazing process because it showed how, while we were unique individuals, we were also in this relationship in the medicine. We would come across a transcendental place where we all shared an experience together. So there were like three realms happening at once.
Mm.
And then, sure enough, that's what integral studies was about, where they were talking about self-integration with Sri Aurobindo's idea. So here was a beautiful experience for me of theory connecting with praxis, so that you could have an experience, and there were people at the school at the time and ways to discuss it and kind of tease it out and build models together. We were very lucky at the school at the time, and I think you caught some of this when Ralph Metzner was there and Ram Dass would be there, and Terrence would come regularly, McKenna, to do workshops. And I used to work at the workshop office, so I got a chance to be at a lot of these workshops to get to know folks. And I would have parties at my house about a block from the school afterwards and invite people over after lectures, and workshops, and people would come over and we'd all have a chance to talk and meet each other. But it was an incredible time. Stan Groff was teaching there, and Stan Kripker and Charles Tart. It was a mecca for all these people that were doing medicine work and also had the credentials of theory building as authors and professors. That it was a high quality theory practice, dialectic. So I was very lucky. I didn't realize how lucky at the time, but I stayed with it and kept my focus and kept making notes and kept working on. I kind of kept with the theme. So it was a good time to be model building, because we had the possibility to also have experiences and do like more phenomenological experiential stuff along with it. So it was a good time for practice and theory building.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I always wonder, you mentioned these realms and that there's sort of this collective that people can go to and have this sort of mutual experience, if you will. People always ask me this question, and sometimes I'm never really sure how to answer it, but especially around this idea of spiritual. What is spirituality?
Uh,
Sometimes, for someone that's very secular, I'm like, even just anything beyond our mind, there's these places beyond that we can go to, and those are realms that I might be able to consider as spiritual or beyond the self, if you will.
yeah,
How did you sort of nuance that out? What are you thinking about when you're thinking about these realms? How do you describe spirituality to somebody in terms of these experiences that never has had these experiences? It's easy to go to dream state, but also like there is something maybe beyond even a dream that you're kind of experiencing there. How do you sort of suss that out for folks?
you framed it really nicely, Larry, because the way I like to look at it is, there's a couple. I call it lucid awakening. Okay, and the reason I like that is because most people will know what lucid dreaming is. And there was a book that I read way at the end of my education. It was called The Soul of Shamanism, and by Daniel Noel. I think he's passed away, but it said on the cover of the book, make sure you read this book before you read any other book on shamanism, and I read it as the last book, you know. But what he talked about there was very interesting. It was, he said there's a realm that goes beyond Carl Jung's, the active imagination realm. So we're dealing with the imagination in a sense, but he was saying it's the interactive imaginal realm that has to be activated for this altered state. And a lot of people describe it in different ways. And here's the interesting thing, because if you imagine a small circle and you call it yourself, and then you do medicine work and you can imagine this circle expanding in 360 degrees. So it's a small circle to a bigger circle, okay? You're going to have people describing their experience of expansion from all different perspectives. Some people say they're going down into the depths, like Hillman talks about. Some people are going to say they're going up into the soul, the spirit realm above. the transpersonal. And that'll be an upwardly direction, maybe more associated with the quote unquote spiritual things. Whereas the soul is what Hillman says is the downward movement, going to the depths of the soul, And then it also does another movement, though. If you think about it, you're going broadening out too. You're expanding laterally. So you're connecting not only with other people besides yourself in that narcissistic, sense of connecting with the community of other humans, but you're also starting to connect with animal spirits, with plant spirits, with the ecological. And then the native people would say that you're going 7 directions, 7 realms backwards, 7 forward. You're connecting with the ancestor spirits for 7 generations both ways. So you could go into the past, causal, and into the mineral level, into the plant level, to the other animal species. You can connect laterally. So some people will expand out in that sense and start connecting to a past connection they have in their own indigenous roots. Some people will project forward and start to get precognitive information, possibly, from the telos, that they expand into the future. So I started realizing that there's like 10 directions. There's the 4 directions, and then there's up and down, where you can go in transpersonal, you're going to the depths, like Hillman would say, and then you're also expanding out laterally. So people will describe the medicine in an expanded experience from a number of different directions. And they're all valid depending on probably where they need to go to first. That's what the description will be. So you'll have different descriptions, but they're all having one thing in common. They're all expanding out from the ordinary, parameter that you're
So
in.
maybe sphere is a better term than circle almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. So you're starting with one size sphere, and from that sphere, you're expanding 360 degrees. So you can report back information from any one of those places that you go. And each time, as you know, it's going to be different. Even if the medicine's the same, everything else changes. You can't step in the same river even once, because you're never the same and the river's never. So when you do medicine in time, you're going to always have a different experience. And there's an interesting word that Groff used to use. He called it holotropic. And I realized that intentions for the medicine are also holotropic in nature. So you'll have an intention one time, then it may be, to go into the past and visit some trauma. And then you may have an intention for the next time to go into the future. And you can almost see that that would counterbalance and put you in the present better. So it's going to shift. The natural tendency of one's intentions is going to shift from one session to another to fill in a holotropic way. And the holotropic means, moving toward wholeness. And the only way you can move toward wholeness is if you fill in the missing pieces as you grow. So it could come from any one of those 10 directions. The other directions are also too. So you have north, south, east, west, up and down, the vertical pole, and that builds your orb, as you said, the sphere, and then you could move outward or inward. And those are also directions of intention that play into this. So if you turn inward, you go into that imaginal realm, and that's kind of the realm where you could go in past or future. The causal will be, usually we look causally to find, answers in the past. But Jung used to say that there's a progressive side of the symbol. What he meant by that was, and he said this in a little Jungian primer book that I had, that I read. He was saying that there's something called teleological finalism, and it sounds real complicated, but it's what he meant was that we have the capacity, when we're freed up from this default of going to the past to look for answers, to go into the future and pick up the future that's speaking into the present, but we don't trust it. And because we don't trust it, we default, because it'll come in as noise when that future is calling us. If we don't trust it, so we feel the noise or anxiety, that triggers us to look into the past for solutions to a problem. And that's the whole psychotherapy model that we're using right now. So Jung was saying that we're at a point in our evolution to address this arrested state of development where we have to learn how to read the future that's speaking into the present. Okay. That's real interesting because that's creativity, basically. That's trusting that imaginative, the interactive imaginal realm, basically, so that you could make sense out of the future speaking in the present without reading it as distortion because of a lack of trust in it. It's extrasensory perception, but really it's primary sense perception that we shut down because we're living in too close quarters sometimes and not enough space for reflection.
Yeah.
So
Just real quick on that, I think it's fascinating because I think about this a lot in terms of like how do we, when we're feeling intuition or when we're feeling forward into the future, you know, at some point in time that also means we're looking back into the past because our future self has to also be engaged with our present self. If
yes,
our present self is looking towards the future, in the future we have to be aware that our present self was looking at us, or our present at that time, now past. So I always get into practice of also sharing gratitude to past selves when things go well, and hopefully that shows up if we believe that all these times are happening right now in the present moment as an intuition. Oh, I need to do this thing. And then in the future you have to remember, oh, I have to say thank you for doing that thing to myself in the past. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I've thought about this in terms of the future, present, past dynamic, and how do we heal ourselves, get into that sense of intuition, and then know that we also have to be a proactive participant in that rather than just saying, oh, well, why isn't my future speaking to me? In our future, which is now, speaking to our past, we have to constantly be sending these messages back like, oh, good choice here. This worked out. This didn't work out. Go this direction. Take this intuition as a good thing, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on that in terms of
well,
timelines?
that's really interesting because Krishnamurti used to say that this whole thing is kind of trying to become something. He would talk about ambition. Moving into the future. Without appreciating, and grounding into the present. Which is connected to the past. So there's something about this expansion that it's a multi-dimensional. It brings in paradox. The whole idea of paradox. It sounds like what you're saying is appreciating the past, knowing your ground, so that you could move forward. Because where there are wounds, you'll be inhibited from moving forward, I think. So in honoring, and giving the past its which connects with the whole ancestral connection by grounding ourselves in our roots. That's the best way to move forward. There's a guy, Otto Scharmer. He calls it a theory U. He calls it. I don't know. He called it theory U, but he has this process he called presencing, which is allowing by acknowledging who you are, where you're at, and being grounded in the moment. That expands you again into 360 degrees, where you're now connected with the past, so you could go to those edges of the future as it expands in any direction.
Mhm.
So that's one of the things about being in the present. The present, what I'm finding is this self that you referred to before. What the medicine teaches is it's a dynamic self. It's not a static thing. So it's hard for a lot of people to realize that their self is their history, their everything they've learned, and everything that's part of the species in a sense is part of the self, and all possibilities open up if you can imagine them. So there's kind of this sense with the medicine, it'll activate this relational self. So that is one of the major shift that happens from the medicine. It'll activate an awareness that we're really a complex, paradoxical, beings, and that's how we can have empathy. That's the whole idea of the perspectival knowing that's in that 4E cognitive psych thing. If you gain perspective and you're able to imagine yourself in the shoes of another, and it's even part of that whole biblical thing. If you can imagine yourself, walking in the shoes of someone else, it gives you perspective, and that's where empathy comes from. So someone that's not able to imagine into perspective, knowing is unable to have empathy, and so they get locked up in this narcissistic, rested state, and there's fear there from the other then, and that's, I think, what we're experiencing a lot of there right now.
Mhm. Yeah, I even think there was, and I didn't. dive fully into the study at all, but I read a little bit on it that there was some study recently, maybe quantum physics study, that says that decisions made in the future will change actually the present.
Yeah, yeah.
Somehow this sort of like somehow backwards time time travel, if you will, it'll change the elements that make the thing in the future happen.
Yeah, well, if you can imagine, if you use the imagination, and the imagination is a realm of its own in a sense. It's got what Castaneda they called it a separate reality. So that interactive imaginal realm, it's not a mere made up fantasy, and it's not like literal reality, but it's its own. It's dream time. It's its own reality, and by ex- extending its own space of real, as in a phenomenological sense, that things can get done in that realm. And they used to do the Aborigines. I remember this story that kind of says it. The Aborigines would get a tribal group together, and the elders would go into dream time together to make decisions for the community. And when they were asked, well, why would you go into dream time to make decisions for ordinary reality for that you bring back and share with the community? They said, we would never think of, doing decisions from this reality, because this is a dualistic reality. Why would we want to do that to our community? So they respected the dream time more than they did this literal space, because of its inhibitions of the duality thing that we have to deal with, the physics of getting through the world this way. So they would use dream time as the more real place to make decisions for the tribe for the going forward.
Yeah, such a fascinating concept. The more real than real concept that comes in Dreamtime, comes in psychedelic experiences, ayahuasca experiences. You
Yes.
get all the time in terms of research that's out there. But that's a whole nother thing that's interesting in terms of like, okay, what is this reality if there are other places that feel, and why do we have that sensation?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
why did that sensation even come up? Like, of all the sensations you can have out there, I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm blissful, I'm joyful, I'm laughing, I'm grieving, whatever else. No, the sense of like, oh, I've been here before. This is super familiar. This is more real than my everyday life.
Yes.
Like, what a strange experience to like have, and you can't really explain that in any kind of like, oh well, this is just neuroscience or what have you. It doesn't seem to make any sense. But talk to me a little bit about this more real than real state for folks that maybe aren't familiar with it.
This is one of the major, I think, reports, if I remember correctly, that they were saying, that reality that they experienced in the medicine of the radical interconnectedness was more real now that they've had the experience than this reality seems to them. So that's one of the reports that comes in, the more real, and it's almost like probably more real because it was forgotten. There's in a lot of the esoteric traditions, they talk about, we were in this state of unity, and then into the womb that transfers in, and all of us experience that, and where everything is kind of symbiotic and perfectly balanced out, and it's prior to the splitting and the birth process, where we're now separate entities. We have to deal with gravity, we have to deal with inside and outside, breathing air in and out, and eating in and out, and the whole process of the dualistic stuff that gets in. These giants are carrying us around, lifting us, bringing us places. These different experiences we have, but that we came from a place where everything was interconnected. So there's a memory there, in the species itself and in our personal unconscious. But the birth process, in a sense, in Kabbalah, they say that you touched on the lip when you're right before you're born, when you're in the womb, and it's a story that's told that it's a gift to be touched on the lip to help you forget the unity realm in which you are now in. Because when you're born, if you constantly remember that unity realm, it would make you want to go back to it. So the angel touches you on the lip to help you forget the unity realm in order to give you a chance to develop your unique individual sense of ego self. So you could be an independent agent in this world of dualism. You can go into saying, well, each one of us has a vocation or a call or a part to play in the larger, evolution of consciousness, which gives everybody agency and a vocation to get in touch with. So there's a memory there of being connected that when we're initiated, the idea of initiation is now that you've developed your first 12, 13 years of life, probably was a little bit, earlier in tribal people, maybe 8 or 9, they would be matured, initiated. They would now know they had forgotten the unity realm. They developed their individual self concept or their ego self concept and where they fit into the tribe and their role to play to make it whole and make it work. So they would be initiated to remember the transpersonal with the ego. So you have now a sense of yourself and you're remembering the transpersonal, which would throw you into the collective community realm so that you're an individual in the context of a mystery. Where do you work now? You work in the community because that would be the middle spot in a sense between the separate individual and the transpersonal would be you're in the community, but you would be nurtured in by guides, nurtured in by the story, especially in the Eleusinian Mystery School. There's a story they all shared, a narrative, and there would be a community to support you when you go out into the do the vision quest or the initiation process, and they would be there when you came back. You had a coherent worldview. Here we do medicine and we do a sacred experience. We come back into a profane community that values the narcissistic, the individual hero kind of archetype. It's hard for people to find how they fit in because the fitting in has that ambitious part to it. It's kind of like competitive. It's exaggerated to maximizing everything. So it's kind of a profane, uh, Western, materialistic, capitalistic worldview. It's a very different kind of experience. So you have two sets and settings. You have a sacred set and setting and a profane one that you have to negotiate now, which requires a whole new level of support, and understanding.
Mhm. So now I'm trying to just like visually put together all of that. So you have the sphere, which is us, ego, consciousness, what have you, and it goes all the directions, inwards, outwards, history, ancestors,
Yeah, you're at the center.
family, everything, community, all that kind of thing. And you have profane and sacred within the context of that sphere, or the sphere is kind of getting battled back and forth between that within the greater context of the
Yes.
transpersonal or the divine. Now you talk a lot about in your work the
Yeah.
vessel of initiation. This is the vessel. Talk to us a little bit about how you see this vessel and where the spots are, the cracks are open for transformation, and all the rigid spots are that make it more difficult.
Well, again, I would use that sphere. So the vessel that would get activated by the medicine, it includes, ordinary baseline consciousness, your ability to imagine, your ability to behold the personal unconscious stuff from your, biographic, the collective, becomes a new invitation to behold that. So you have your ordinary baseline conscious. You could dream, you could lucid dream, or you could lucid awaken. So there's this awakening thing where you could actually awaken in this realm where this would be like the trip. This is like they say in Buddhism that this is the perfect space for awakening. So you look at the baseline consciousness, you look at the support context, which is, if you look to Buddhism, they talk about the three jewels. So you add on the three jewels, the Sangha, the community, the Dharma, a teaching system that delivers, and the community, the whole sense of guidance is there. These things are dynamic. So the guidance can start out to be an external, shaman from the tribe. And then it could also be the medicine itself can be part of the guidance. So it's getting closer to you. Then the guidance can finally be the self archetype that gets activated. So you have this movement from exterior to interior. So you're starting to activate this vessel that is supported by the three jewels, the Sangha, the Dharma, the teaching system, the narrative, the mythology, the mythos that gets passed on. And so you have this vessel activated, then you have an understanding of the phenomenology of what the experience is to that uninitiated ego, it gets activated by the medicine. So now it knows how to expand out and include things from the future, from the past. Information can come in and be shared. If you have that map of past, future, and extending out, and to include all my relations, the extended community. So you're building this vessel that has like marcations on it in psychic. It's like a psychic vessel, and you could travel with it. It's kind of like if you gave someone the keys to a car, they know how to drive, they'll feel okay. But then you give them the keys to a Learjet, and you say, go out, since you could drive a car and have a good time. Let me know when you land. If they don't know how to work the jet, they have pedals on the floor. You pull the steering wheel, it goes up. There's a lot of weight. You have to learn how to operate this vessel, this vehicle you're in order to
Vessel
navigate
maybe goes, does, just real quick on that, does that because the vessel goes up and down in a way that
up
the car only goes side to
and
side?
yeah, and a jet could fall sideways and go down. You could do all kinds of things in space. You're
You're dealing with
traveling.
different sort of relationality in terms of the vessel.
Exactly, exactly. So that's a metaphor that would work. So learning how to fly the jet before will give you a lot of advantages, because you'll know how to work with all the pressures and the movements and all the controls. So to kind of it's like riding a bike. Once you learn how to ride a bike, you don't forget. And that's one of the four cognitive things. You can know what a bike is, but then to know how to ride the bike is a whole different learning experience. It goes into your body. It's an embodied kind of thing. And from that, you can gain a perspective of how to take off, how to fly the plane, how to land the plane, which is most important. So you know how to maneuver this thing throughout the process of an experience. So it gives you a sense of um, uh, dynamic control rather than rigid control. So you're fluid. You're picking up on the headwind. You're picking up on what it's like to fall to the left when you hit the floor pedal on the jet. It's kind of you know how to fly the thing, so that not only do you learn how to fly it, but when information comes in on your traveling journey, you know where it's coming from. Is this my past? Is this the collective past? Is this coming from a teleological? Is this an intuition that I have to map something out? I'm getting a discovery coming in. Is this coming from down low in the depths of the collective unconscious? You get to be your own guide. So this is how this relational self gets activated, to be able to navigate, through the journey, rather than defer to someone that will have their own narrative to share with you. It might not be a bad narrative, but it might not be coming from your own depths. But when you learn what the controls are and to fly the plane, you could make meaning.
Hmm. And of this theory you're doing is also grounded in the practice of you doing integration circles and integrations with individuals. How do you help people with the integration process, given all of this context that you're speaking about?
Well, what I figured to do is it helps to just give a layout of the land, and I find that is very helpful. I had one person that I was working with that was a vet, and he was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, and uh, and he didn't really have any map of. They were doing ketamine therapy with him, but he would just go under, and then he would report these experiences, but he didn't know how to put them in any learning model, so that something can be gained from him. It would just be like an experience that he would go through without having a way to make sense out of it. And you can imagine it could be a little bit disturbing if he didn't know, is this my stuff coming up? Is this the collective stuff coming up? Am I getting stuff from the future? But once he had the directionality of, he was at the center of a dynamic experience that was moving in many directions, that he could start to make sense out of it and bring it into himself, and make an understanding for himself, because he was getting no support really. I mean, they would say, how did your experience go? Tell us what it was like. But he didn't have any sense of learning something from it to discern what was actually happening. So
Mhm.
that's one way. So the model of simply just the 10 directions, would helped him to kind of navigate through, and then he could kind of get himself centered and know where he was, so that he could go into the experience without starting to feel like he was losing control before he knew what the map was that he was navigating, and flying through.
Mhm. So when you're obviously there's no answer to this question, so I'll just preface it with that and don't expect only a yes or no, and only yes or no. No, so what do you think that our transformation through psychedelics, through entheogens, through plant medicines, through these sacred other experiences, through the exploration of consciousness, what do you think? Where do you think I don't want to say a goal for lack of a better term, but what do you think is on the other side of that? What do you think is the part of the process that we're getting to?
Well, I think, I like Rick Tarnas's work. He talks about that the species right now is going through an initiation, a collective way. And the way I said that is the collective unconscious is now speaking to the consciousness of the collective. And most people can kind of get, kind of a little play on words there, but it's I think an important one, and it kind of ties into what Rick was talking about when he was saying, that the species is going through this together now. So it's going to hit each one of us differently. I think, I like Gurdjieff's work because he said it's almost impossible for an individual to wake up on their own. And if you think about that, what he was saying that we have to form communities, we have to come together in groups now because we help each other wake up by not letting each other fall asleep, by saying, supporting each other, because we each have our own blind spot where we're looking out from. I ran into uh, Eric Nyman, who was a student of Jung's, and he didn't get a lot of credit for his work, but he was saying that individuation, or the individual waking up, is just the first part of the process. He says the second part of the process is we have to wake up collectively. The species needs to wake up, and if you look at where we're at right now, in the division and the mentality that we have of being fearing the other and building up defense mechanisms of inner national missile systems to protect ourselves from each other. The absurdity of the whole thing comes back to like a way of having a collective way to get together on the planet. The medicine will open up an ecological awareness, a vocational awareness. It'll open up a sense that even though we know so much, that we push out the parameter of the mystery too. The unknown is always backed up against the unknowable. So you get a sense of a real perspective of where we are and how we are on a planet that has certain limited resources that we need to survive. So it gives us an ecological perspective. So I think we have to wake up collectively and we have to all maintain an ecological perspective. I don't think it gets any more real than that. And then there's an opportunity, I think, that the medicine throws us out into this gaining a perspective by expanding whatever direction you like to expand into. You come back and you realize that this is the trip, right here. But you don't see that clearly until you gain a perspective from the medicine. So the medicine is a tool that gives you perspective to see this is the place here we have to work with, and we have to make ourselves work together to make a beautiful planet to live on, because it's a paradise if we could do that. So I think the medicine is throwing us out so we could land back here and work on a collective awakening. I think that's where we're at. Otherwise, we're going to slowly toxify the planet, or we're going to it'll by accident you'll have some disasters that we can't deal with that'll give us nuclear winter on a third of the planet, and then it'll be a disaster. So we have an opportunity. I think that's where we're at right now. I think the collective is coming through very strong, and it's up to us. So hopefully the medicine could help a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I like how you brought in the ecological side of things too, and I know you spoke to that earlier on the spheres and how there's the mineral and the animal and the plants and the mushrooms and all the spirits that are there, which has a very kind of animistic perspective, and how much differently we look at the world when we see everything is imbued with spirit as part of the conversation is not something to just kind of extract from or throw away, but actually is part of this bigger moment, right? And I think we hear this a lot too, uh, and it's so easy to dismiss as like, okay, this is political rhetoric around this thing, or there's agendas around like all the destruction that's happening, environmental destruction that's happening right now. But even we're talking about Earth as consciousness or Gaian mind, if you will. There, I know Richard Doyle talks about the term ecodelic, which I'm sure you've probably heard
I
before.
love it.
What is this? What does this mean in terms of our maybe even connection beyond even the transpersonal, but into the Earth itself? Maybe speak a little bit more about that ecological connection there.
Well, I mean, there are limits to growth, and most of the sciences are talking about it, and then the religions talk about how we should get along with, to make it a collective, kind of a support system to live on the planet together. It's we're pushing the limits out of fear, I think, and you have fear when you think you're like a static thing, when you like grabbing on to some static concepts like fundamentalisms, whatever they would be, and it's a challenge to kind of open up and really see that we really do kind of form each other. We're informing each other, and then if there's a collective uh, method for just remembering what our position is, because we get so inflated, I think, and think that we're the center of everything. We've done that before, with
Mhm.
the everything is moving around the earth kind of thing. But that we default to that in a way, because we have this independent ego that if it's uninitiated, it gets a little bit inflated, and it's catchy, that kind of inflation. I think, when others are in the same place. So it's kind of, how do you create an experience where people can let go of that solid operationalized sense of ego, where it's more relational and dynamic, and you move through the center and you can go out any direction, you come back to the center. It's a dynamic center, and if you have people that are practicing that, how to do that, whether it be through any of those flow states. I mean, it could be done through dancing. I did it through playing hockey. I was, lucky when I was a kid. You embody that flow state, it stays in your memory. And there's hundreds of ways to do it. Medicine is a quick way of taking away all the boundaries and throwing you into a dynamic state of movement. That's a radical experience. It needs support to digest that, but there's so many ways of getting that embodied dynamic sense that they used to do it in tribal ceremonies, and the Grateful Dead, Stan Krippner used to talk about, it's one of the only places that they had this ongoing, ritual that still had quality of transformation available to it. People getting together, dancing, celebrating. Everybody had their own space, but they were doing it in a community. These ritual enactments are really important, I think, and this is this is a part of the challenge to get out of the individual awakening thing and get into more. But how can we collectively remember what we're doing here, and how to make this work? So we don't end up. We're good at war. We're good at war. We're at war in ourselves. We start out, we're at war with each other, and then we're at war with nature. And we got to get over that. And that's the challenge of our arrested state of development, I think. Really, to get into that space where and Aurobindo is into this. How do you value otherness, to where it's adding to you if you're not threatened. If you know who you are, you're not going to be intimidated by someone that's different than you, or someone that comes with a different perspective than you. It becomes a value, rather than something to be turned away from and feared.
Great, yeah, thank you. Yeah. So we're about 10 minutes out, and this is something that we always ask, and this is kind of was a nice little lead up to this question. And we ask all of our guests at the very end here. Um, Obviously, this is kind of like a promotional plug of anything else, but it's also very interesting to hear the different ways that people are thinking about what does this mean to the collective? How is this engaged with the community, et cetera? And so the question we always ask people is, when we say the words decriminalize nature, what does that mean to you?
Wow, decriminalizing nature. Well, it's kind of an absurdity to criminalize nature. It's almost like we have a war on drugs, we have a war on poverty, we have a war on everything. It's almost that same mentality. So you criminalize first, and you decriminalize. It, it's it, it's how the mind could get absurd. I think it pushes out to an absurdity. Um, why would nature be criminalized? You're going to learn something that's going to make you less able to be manipulated by someone. Maybe is one of the things I think about. Um, are you going to be less easily pacified by those that want to hold power? So it has a control mechanism built into it. To decriminalize, but it should never have been criminalized in the first place. But it needed the piece that was missing. I think was the knowledge part. We got into like an anti-intellectual thing, for a while, because we lost our connection to the wisdom, to the knowledge, that came from our own tradition, from the Eleusinian mystery school. There was knowledge built in and how to get along with the natural world, and that it was not something to be feared, and that there were medicines there to be used for healing, and they were not even probably articulated as medicines. I mean, a lot of them were just things that grew, and they knew when to take them, when to use them, and they were just for natural health, and then you start separating all the stuff and controlling them, and they always gain value when you restrict them. So it gets, it creates all this chaos, that
Mm.
has to be undone.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and kind of remind me of what you were saying earlier about there being a war on nature, and then of course, many people talk about this kind of war on consciousness, what altered states or what other ways of knowing are okay, and other ones are not okay. So
Yeah.
yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So we're gonna hop it over to Rachel for a quick question and maybe some comments, and then we'll go from there.
Ooh, what a great conversation. I had a couple other questions that I think might take a bit longer for you to answer, Howie, but I'm going to keep it to your. I loved the stuff you talked about in terms of like the dream time and memory and the relationship between us in this realm and the imagination realm and like what is real, all this stuff. Like, because in that conversation, like, there's no way we can actually like talk, like, really know about it in this 3D reality, but like to have those conversations, I think that's like how we grow. But my question for you, Howie, is um, what are your thoughts between the relationship between dreams and memory? Because I always do this thing with my sister where like sometimes I have like memories or let's say dreams from when you're like a child, like 8 or 9 years old, and I'll confirm with her. I'm like, listen, did this really happen or did I dream it? And she's like, oh, that really happened. But even if I only dreamed it, is it only a dream? So just thoughts on what you think of Howie between like dream states, memory states, and then like also like remembering maybe old dreams and the difference between dreams and memories.
Well, like what I just recently, learned about was that memories are really always reconstructions of what we think the past was. So in a sense, there's an element of dreaming in recalling even a literal memory. Is that correct? I think that's pretty much,
I think
so.
so, yeah. Like what
So
you
if
said too about saying in your integration of how you're sharing stories of what happened, like that's what helps. I, I don't know what you want to call it, but it helps make the memory or the experience more real, being able to talk to others about it.
Yeah, and so if memory is a construction or reconstruction of something, and then you give some more power to the imaginal realm as its own space, not mere fantasy, is the way Noel talks about it, and not literal reality. So you give it its own place, and that's kind of the phenomenological stance on it. That it's given to experience, so it has a reality level to it, but it's not to be equated to literal reality. And then if you start to see memory as being a construction using the imagination, you start to see that there's a spectrum. really in some of the boundaries, and it might even refer to the boundaries between us as
Mm-hmm.
beings. When we start to break it down into physics, there's a lot of connection. We start to be more space than we are form.
Yeah.
So if you take it out into even the sciences, there's not these hard line boundaries. So that's why I like to call the self archetype that Jung said was the primary archetype as a relational self archetype. It's spectrumized, which allows people in and out into the dream time, into
Yeah.
into the imaginal. So it takes those lines out that really, if it's fractals all the way down, in a sense, if you look at it. So it kind of softens everything to the deepest of the four cognitive psych things, which is the participatory knowing.
Yeah.
That's what gets activated at the medicine, the deepest level of knowing, the participatory. So it brings a little bit of experiential into this mind that's always separating things because we don't want to walk through, walls. We don't want to fall off the edge of a cliff. So we've got this brain that's probably 100 times more sophisticated than any computer, even with the multi-level chips they have now, according to John Vervaeke. There's no way
Mm.
we rule out more than we focus on, so, to make a decision just to talk like this. So there's this incredible amount of information we're always doing just to be in this present, but it's very permeable, and that is the nature of it. In a way we forget because we've gotten used to being separate selves, just because we have to feed ourselves. And then you have a reaction to that, like, oh, all that exists is the unity realm, and then so you lose yourself then, your agency. So going back and forth, I think the way it gets resolved is the community realm.
Yeah.
So that we have ourselves in community, in relationship, and when we help each other remind ourselves that there's these different dimensions of the spectrum. So
Love that.
it's all kind of a narrative that we're looking to find a dynamic balance with each other here, because we're communicating globally now.
It's a great answer. I love that. Like, we're helping each other remember.
Yes, yes,
Definitely. All right.
that's a beautiful
Back
way
to
to put
you,
it.
Larry.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate it. Yeah. So thank you for this great conversation, Howie. It's been always a pleasure. I think we should schedule another one sooner than later because,
I love it.
there's about 10 tangents that I would have liked to have gone on. I'm sure Rachel has some tangents as well that would have been great to kind of jump onto. And I think, in terms of like really diving into consciousness and theory of consciousness and all this, I think as far as I know personally, you're probably one of the people in the top 5 people in terms of actually diving into it and working on it. And I've seen you work on it for so long and like figure out the tensions and really, what about this? And really like spend the time to like explore it a little bit. So I think we have some good conversations ahead of us. So I really appreciate your being here today. I want to give you a few minutes to just like anything that we might have missed,
Yeah.
knowing that of course we'll be doing some future stuff as well, so you don't have to dive too deep in it. And then of course any ways to contact you or any information that you think people should check out, any website or where you're showing your art or any of that kind of thing. Go ahead and share that.
Well, let's see. First of all, I want to say how much I appreciate you and the work that you've done. And I really mean that. You've been an inspiration to me, with your steadfast exploration, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and and our connection throughout this time. So thank you for that. And you're doing a great work. You had that political side down. You were fearless, man, and you've done some great work, and I really really appreciate it. It's great talking to you anytime. I'm doing starting to do little workshops over in North Beach, with Professor Siegel's Smart Shop,
Mhm.
and they're a church, and they were kind enough to give me a space to explore some of these things. I've done some integration circles there for the last couple of years, and I'm starting to do a workshop there to help people build this vessel. I've done one, and I'm going to do another one coming up at the end of March, the last Sunday in March, I believe it is.
Okay.
So that's I have some art up there. I'll leave it up till they get a next show. I filled up the room with some.
Would somebody find the information on Professor Siegel's or Church of the Mother Gong, or where would they find your information on your workshop?
They could find it through Professor Siegel's Smart Shop. I think on their website it should be posted in the next couple of days or so. I'm going to go talk to them because we just came up with a title for the workshop. It'll be I think it's building the vessel for the medicine work, a knowledge-based approach, a wisdom-based approach, something. But and I welcome anybody to come in and check out the place and join me in the workshop. We could build this thing together. And yeah,
Great. Well, thank you so much, Howie. Always a pleasure.
that's
Reminder everybody that we have usually go every 2 weeks, so we'll be going live again in 2 weeks. Keep an eye. We'll be putting out a schedule before too long. We got some interesting things coming for the rest of the spring here. Reminder, you can always find us live on YouTube, Rumble, or Odyssey, or the following week or two, either on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or other platforms. Our next show will be actually March 9th with Hans Weigold, and he's going to be talking about some incredible healing he's had with ayahuasca and the way that he found himself to breathwork, which has really helped him in creating this vessel and working with these other altered states of consciousness. So if you haven't already subscribed to us, go ahead and give us a subscription, give us a click, give us a link, check us out and find out what's going on in the next show. And until next time, thank you, everybody. Tune in, stay rooted, and let's grow together. Have a great Sunday. Bye-bye now.
thank you.
Bye.